I just ask some of the veterans of this project what they felt happened? Was it that they were not followed on by people with similar skills, or that they were, but there was no place for those people to play, as it were, that there were not the companies, the organisations following on from Lions, etc., to take the whole thing forward?
No, excuse me.
In other words, what I'm asking is, was it about skills? Was it about this problem that we have been talking about, computer science not being taught in schools, or was it more about finance and the structure of the industry in Britain?
I think this about finance and structure has to do specifically with the British industry, yes. I think in the film I mentioned people plunging into projects. Some of the very big projects, people have rather taken narrow views on how to do those. And the broader view, which I think Leo propagated and so on, and in a sense is exemplified by the work Peter Herman did with British Airways in developing the airline reservation system. A hugely successful operation. There are too few people who do things in this very careful, reasoned way. People have tended to plunge into things. I don't know everyone, so I can't say everybody does it that way. But looking around me, I see too much of that. And perhaps it comes from an attitude that all we have to do, if we're going to use computers, is to replace what we have at the moment with a piece of machinery which will do the same thing, but perhaps a bit cheaper, but not more effectively. And that's something I think we imported something from America to a certain extent. It was certainly very much the IBM way of working a few decades ago. IBM has transformed itself, of course. There's still a big change.
Could I just say something that I was told by John? One of the amazing things about Joe Lyons was the relationship between the managers and the directors.
Yes.
And in fact, it was I think it must have been a unique situation. Somehow or other, Simmons and Thompson persuaded the directors to trust the engineers and then to trust the people who did the software. They had absolute trust. They had freedom. Yeah. Nobody came along with a larger organization and said, I'm terribly sorry, you have to be amalgamated into something else. Because you were at the very beginning of something that did that.
Yes.
But I think there's not enough perhaps is understood about the relationship between these people, very delicately managed by Simmons. I think it was difficult. I was fortunate enough, perhaps, to hear more about Simmons, but maybe some did. But it's amazing how he did it. And when you all knew Simmons, I think, well, you knew Simmons. One of the things that was most entertaining about Mr. Simmons was what he did at lunchtime. Do you know what he did at lunchtime? He betted on horses. He was a mathematician. He loved risk.
Did he make money?
I didn't dare ask. If I'm in this situation again, the first thing I'll do is ask.
Can I just say something? Lions were a company which where everybody now talks about outsourcing. They were insourcing. They had a reputation and a period when they were doing everything themselves. They thought it's better and they can do it better than somebody else. And so they made their own trucks and they made their own cooking equipment and they developed on the catering and food side a whole series of things. They were a company that was innovating but doing everything themselves. And that culture disappeared completely later. That was in fact, the culture now is of course entirely outsourcing. You only do that which you can do and don't try to do the other things. And I think that was an important factor at that time in Lions.
But if it's interesting,
yes, one of the negative consequences of that was that it instilled in us a kind of arrogance that didn't allow us to see what other people were doing, because we thought we were better than everybody else.
It sounds remarkably similar to the approach that Apple has taken, which was disastrous for many years, but in the end worked. In other words, total control of everything
Yes.
from one end of the process to the other.
Yes.
But perhaps Steve Jobs would have been a good man within Hall.
But I must tell you a story. One of the companies we visited was another one which believed totally it could do everything. It was a single sewing machine company in Scotland. And they did everything themselves. They bought unrefined oil and made the oil for things. They built their own oil cans, everything. But when I went there in the 1970s, I think, they had employed their first graduate. And that graduate was then used as a guide to take tourists around the things. When the Japanese came with their slicker methods and better sewing machines, the company simply couldn't respond. That's doing the same thing, but without that.
Well, yes, there are downsides from
Yes,
it.
of course.
But it's partly an explanation of
Question.
idea.
Can I try and answer Rory's question? I think it comes down to literacy. I think the characteristic of an in-sourcing board was that they were technologically literate. They had a reasonably good idea of what was going on and why. For many years, British boardrooms had financial literacy, but they didn't have technological literacy, and in many cases still don't. And I think that's a real problem.
Yes,
I
again,
might
I can tell
just counter
many,
that
many
slightly.
stories.
In that Anthony Salmon, who was the board member
Yeah.
who was responsible for Leo,
Yeah.
told me that he knew no more about what was going on in the computer than a mechanic with a screwdriver. So I think the...
Yes. Well, it's the point that this lady made, that engineers were trusted at
They
the
were
top of the company.
exactly.
And I think very often we see a situation where there's the engineering department who are asked to do things, but they're not integrated into the
I
decision
didn't
making.
say knowledge, I said literacy. So they understood.
Can I add something which is a bit cynical and a little
Yeah.
blind? Imagine what would have happened if the Lions board, or whoever was pushing this desire to have automation in the company, and instead of doing what they did, so let's do it, they went to government for a grant. And this leads me on to say, look at what happened to Lions, look what happened to the computer industry, and I blame government on the whole.
Yes. Yeah.
For the whole darn shebang. Whereas in the States, it's free enterprise.
Yeah.
They have many
Yes.
failures,
Yes.
but they have some successes.
Yeah.
And this, to me, says, don't go get government money, whatever you do.
And I think it's also exemplified.
And the National Health Service is another problem.
Yeah. And I think it's exemplified what happened at the end of the computer industry when Tony Benn created ICL. He brought together all the commercial computing companies, but he kept the defense side, which was one of the most innovative, out of the merger. And I think that was a disastrous decision. That was split. I've talked to Arthur Humphreys about it and he disagrees.
But it wasn't the case that the American companies didn't get government money. They got billions of defence dollars.
But it was defence. It
Yes,
was,
but
it
it was
targeted
able- they-
stuff where they didn't want
And that was not
they
allowed.
to automate their medical services.
No, but they were able to use the defence dollars
Yeah.
to develop their staff, their innovation, and so on.
There was almost a firewall between
Yeah,
them.
but the government didn't try to create a computer industry.
No, indeed. No.
That's because this is what happened to Lions. They did not become a computer industry. They were swallowed up in a mess.
The role of government is to be a good customer, and it's a very large customer, not a sponsor.
Are there any lessons from Leo for people who are running big IT projects today? I mean, I think you mentioned the NHS, for example.
There are a lot of lessons. I don't know where to start on.
They don't do more than you can do.
Let me start with that you have to work with and understand the client, and the client has to understand you. And in the case of National Health Service, everything was centralized, and the successful systems which existed in many hospital trusts were cut loose. The people who did them were forgotten. And that's one lesson. At Leo, we insisted that we understood we were arrogant, we know, but we still insisted that we understood them. I remember Thompson, when I looked at the Ford Motor Company, and I showed him what I thought it was. The way he responded, that us understanding them and them understanding us was totally crucial. And where they had made successful things, we could use those successful things. And nowadays, these teams work in isolation from
No, I think what was impressive most about David Cameron was that he went into the tea shops and talked to the tea shop manageresses and established things like, if they had 4 rolls left at the end of the day, that was 4 black marks. And so they under-ordered to make sure they didn't have anything left on the shelves at the end of the day. And he developed a system that enabled them, using the computer, to be much more accurate in ordering how much they needed for each day, so that didn't happen. So it was critical, not just, when you say the client, it's not just the manager of the client. You actually have to go and talk to the person on the shop floor who's doing the work, and find out how the system works at that level, and then build it up from there.
And why the current system doesn't work.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think one of the aspects you probably that hadn't been covered this morning is the amazing way in which the Lions management introduced computers into the company. You see, at that time it was not easy to switch over from a hand clerical system to an automated system, and Lions were absolutely brilliant at doing this. So I think Frank can probably tell you much better than I can, but when they first started using the machine, the clerks did the work and the machine did the work. And when the machine was finding the clerk's mistakes, they dropped the clerical work. And in this way, there was no hitch in taking over. In fact, a number of large firms nearly went broke in trying to change over from a clerical system to an automated system.
Just like that, yes.
I think IBM, ITC was one of them.
Let me give you one very important one. I think we didn't call it that, but we saw that making business process changes as we were doing, it's not a deterministic thing, it's something which has to be experimented with. So every element of anything which was new, had to be experimented with. So when we introduced a document reader, we did experiments on how can people mark the documents. These were mark readers. How can they do what